Hello, this is Graham. In this video, we're going to be looking at positive psychology. This is certainly the most recent development of the humanist school of therapy, with its origins in the person-centered approach. It's also one of the most profound shake-ups of psychology ever, really. Seligman and Csikszentmihalyi defined positive psychology as the scientific study of positive human functioning and flourishing on multiple levels that include the biological, personal, relational, institutional, cultural, and global dimensions of life. They were not the first to recognize its importance. Even Aristotle, who lived over 300 years BCE, spoke of the importance of happiness and well-being, which he termed eudaimonia. Let's look firstly at some of the modern origins of positive psychology. Abraham Maslow, in his 1954 book Motivation and Personality, included a chapter Towards a Positive Psychology, in which he explains that the science of psychology has been far more successful on the negative than on the positive side. It has revealed to us much more about man's shortcomings, his illness, his sins, but little about his potentialities, his virtues, his achievable aspirations, or his full psychological height. It is as if psychology has voluntarily restricted itself to only half its rightful jurisdiction, the darker, meaner half. Humanistic counselling, represented by Maslow, Rollo May, James Bugental, and Carl Rogers, took off in the 1960s, with its emphasis on happiness, well-being, and potential. In the mid-1980s, Edward Deci and Richard Ryan published their seminal book, Self-Determination and Intrinsic Motivation in Human Behaviour, which argued that intrinsic motivators were far more significant than extrinsic ones. In particular, they demonstrated the importance of three: autonomy, being in control of your own choices in life; competence, being a master of a skill or knowledge; and relatedness, having a network of appreciative and supportive contacts, all of which they said were essential to human motivation, and therefore key to working towards self-actualization. In 1998, Professor Martin Seligman became president of the American Psychological Association, and he declared that positive psychology would be the key theme of his tenure. Seligman and Csikszentmihalyi wrote The Science of Happiness in 2000. Seligman then went on to write Authentic Happiness, using the new positive psychology to realize your potential for lasting fulfillment, in 2002. Before we look at what positive psychology is all about, it's helpful to understand what the principal alternative is. In the aftermath of World War II, most psychological work focused on understanding mental illness, especially where it was the result of trauma of various kinds. Among the impacts of this approach was a gender difference in our approach to clients. When women displayed symptoms of mental illness, usually in the form of an acute lack of self-esteem, they would be offered the opportunity to voluntarily attend a residential institution, where the treatments tended to subdue their symptoms rather than addressing the cause. When men displayed symptoms, they tended to be violent, and many of them ended up in prison rather than hospital. Here they would be offered help getting back on track through rehab programs, educational ones, and spiritual teaching. They were much less likely to be considered mentally ill. In an essay written in 1971, the Scots psychiatrist R.D. Laing described the standard medical model of complaint, history, physical examination, tests, diagnosis, treatment, and prognosis. He argued that this led to a set of assumptions about cause and remediation that at best could bring the patient back to a condition that resembled how they were before their illness began. It did nothing to take them beyond it. In psychology, the medical model leads to the assumption that most psychopathologies are the result of organic or physical causes: damage to the brain, the nature of the neurotransmitters, genetics, endocrine misfunctions, and so on. It's this approach that has led to the taxonomies of mental disorders, such as the DSM-5. This approach has its purpose. Individual circumstances often need to be approached from this angle. However, it's only part of the picture, and sometimes after a brief review, it's best put to one side and to focus on something very different, finding a way out of the present circumstances. And this is the role of positive psychology. There is a genre of writing known as self-help, which originated in the late 1800s with a book of that title by an author, Samuel Smiles. Since then, there have been waves of popular books, most of which sound compelling but lack any evidence. Seligman and Csikszentmihalyi were keen to distance positive psychology from this genre. As they said in this quote, "Psychology is not just the study of pathology, weakness, and damage. It's also the study of strength and virtue. Treatment is not just fixing what is broken, it is nurturing what is best. Psychology is not just a branch of medicine concerned with illness or health, it is much larger. It's about work, education, insight, love, growth, and play. And in this quest for what is best, positive psychology does not rely on wishful thinking, faith, self-deception, fads, or hand-waving. It tries to adapt what is best in the scientific method to the unique problems that human behavior presents to those who wish to understand it in all its complexity." Positive psychology research tends to address three main themes. It's concerned with what makes one moment happier, more satisfying, or absorbing than the next. How to build more positive personalities, people who are capable, self-directed, and adaptive. And how to create more positive environments around us, at work and in society. We're going to have a look at some key theories of positive psychology. In the 1970s, Martin Seligman demonstrated that learned helplessness was a psychological condition in which a human being has learnt to behave helplessly in a particular situation, usually after experiencing some inability to avoid an adverse situation, even when it actually has the power to change its circumstances. Seligman saw a similarity with severely depressed patients and argued that clinical depression and related mental illnesses result at least in part from a perceived lack of control over the outcome of a situation. Rather than focusing on the illness symptoms, he began to promote the value of enabling patients to take control and see ways out of their situation. Csikszentmihalyi became interested in the way that people can become so engrossed in an activity that their mind ceases consciously to register their surroundings. He called this flow. You may have encountered it when you go out for a jog and you suddenly realize that you don't remember seeing things that you've gone past. The brain was still able to register your feet falling so you didn't fall over, but not the extra information about your surroundings. As well as a sense of intense concentration and loss of self-awareness, you also have a feeling of being neither bored nor overwhelmed. Experiencing flow is intrinsically satisfying, but it's only achieved when the challenge of the situation meets your personal abilities. If you feel that you aren't up to the challenge, then you'll probably feel anxious. On the other hand, if the task is too easy for you, then you'll probably be bored. Peterson's work, published in 2000, was about the pursuit of optimism. The idea of enabling someone to be optimistic is at the core of positive psychology, helping them to cease to experience themselves as victims and instead to feel that they are their own pilot. The work of Deci and Ryan, which was popularized by Dan Pink in his book Drive, has demonstrated the power of three conditions necessary for happiness. They take the form of autonomy, mastery, and purpose. George Vaillant is an interesting contributor to the field. A psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, he has a long record of empirical studies of the human defense mechanisms, which were originally classified by Anna Freud. His research, though, is mainly based on 2 longitudinal studies comparing the aging and happiness of 724 people, drawn roughly 1/3 from Harvard graduates, 1/3 of young men who were raised in the rougher urban areas of Boston between 1940 and 1945, and 1/3 of a similar age taken from the Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. As well as aging and happiness, he studied the recovery processes from schizophrenia, heroin addiction, alcoholism, and personality disorder. His studies look at this group of people, these cohorts, over a period of more than 70 years. His work has led to a reconsideration of some of the defenses, especially altruism, humour, and anticipation, as being significant in human happiness rather than being pathological. Finally, Peterson and Seligman have gone on to collaborate in the development of a classification of positive personality traits. If you like, it's the mirror of the DSM-5. These traits help people to focus on their strengths and work on aspects of themselves that are less well refined. The 6 traits that they identify are wisdom and knowledge, courage, humanity, justice, temperance, by which they mean forgiveness and mercy, humility, prudence and self-control, and transcendence, an appreciation of beauty and excellence, gratitude, hope, humour, and spirituality. I think perhaps it might be helpful to try and summarise positive psychology. Rather than looking backwards at causes, which would be the psychoanalytic approach, or forwards in an entirely undirected way, which would be pure person-centred approach, positive psychology provides purely evidence-based tools to help the client focus their life on their personal strengths and to work on aspects of their strengths and values that have been proven to improve their happiness and sense of personal satisfaction. Being an extension of the humanist approaches, this allows the individual to work towards their sense of self-actualization.